All right, welcome back everybody. In the last couple of videos, we set up the root of our application. We got the routing between the onboarding flow and the tab bar flow set up. But now it's time to actually start building out some of these views. So in this app, we're going to start with the onboarding flow. I think it's a little more natural to start with the onboarding flow because that's just the general user experience. They're going to go through the onboarding flow first, and then they're going to enter the app. I will caveat here that if I was building some sort of MVP, I probably would start by building out the core feature that I'm trying to prove in my app, just so that I know that it's a good feature before I build the rest of the application. Obviously, we're building this app regardless of whether or not the chat part is good, because this is just a tutorial course. So let's get started here. We're going to build out the welcome view first, which we already have a file for, but we haven't actually added the UI yet. I have a final version of the app, what we're going to build. This image is just a random image. In the production version, you can put in a specific image if you want to, but it's pretty simple. We have an image at the top, we have a title and a subtitle, the CTA button, which we already created, another button for signing in rather than creating a new account, and then our terms of service and privacy policy. Pretty easy screen, but we're going to start real quick with just loading this image. For this image, we're going to actually load a remote image. And to load the remote image, we are going to use a third-party package called SD Web Image. So yes, SwiftUI does have async image, the async image component, but I find that some of the third-party packages are a little bit more performant, and the third-party packages have caching and persistence built into them, while async image does not. All right, so if I go to the public repo, SD Web Image SwiftUI, let's go and copy the code. I also have a video on my YouTube channel where I cover how to implement this SDK as well as Kingfisher, which I will link those videos below. I'm going to move fast here because I covered this in detail in that video. If you want to dive into the details, just check out that video and then come on back to this. SD Image SwiftUI, we have the URL here. Let's jump into our code base. Go to the project navigator. We're going to go to the package dependencies tab here and click the plus to add a new dependency. We also, just FYI, could go File, Add Package Dependencies. The same pop-up will pop up here. I'm going to paste in our URL. Let's add the package to our project. This should add the package to our main target, which is this first one here, not our testing targets, just the main target, and click Add Package. We're going to build out a reusable component so that we can work with SD Web Image SwiftUI. This is going to be the same component that I built in the tutorial on my YouTube channel. So outside of the core section, we're going to have another folder up here, and I'm going to call this one Components. These will be reusable components across all of the different screens. Inside this Components folder, I'm going to put a Images folder. So anything related to a reusable image will go in this folder. And then let's go ahead and create a new Swift file from template, and it's going to be called our image loader view. So I'll basically just use this as a little wrapper for the SD Web Image SDK. Let's import SD Web Image SwiftUI. From here, we're going to add a web image from the SDK, and we're going to pass in a URL. The URL will be from a string, and then let's pass in the string. So here we'll say var URL string of type string, and I'll set it equal to a blank string for 1 second, pass that in. We're going to use this random photo generator URL from pixum.photos, in which we can then add just a random image size, so maybe 200 by 200. And then if you click on this link, you'll see that it just generates a random image. Every time it's a different image. It's perfect for prototyping and testing and things like that. So I'm going to copy this link here and bring it into our application. And then let's just make it maybe 600 by 600. We can see the image loading up here. Let's make this web image.resizable so that we can adjust it to our views, as well as let's add a loading indicator with the activity indicator on top while it is loading. Let's give this an aspect ratio, and we want to be able to determine whether or not this image is going to be in the fit or the fill mode. So let's pass in a content mode. So up here, I'm going to say var resizing mode of type content mode, and I'm going to set it equal to fill to start, and we'll pass that in as this value here. I do want to point out as we continue in this course that I am purposely making these variables and not making them private because I want to include them in the initializer for the image loader view. In Swift, if you have a variable with a default value, there actually is an implied initializer that gets created for this variable and this variable. Just to show you guys, if we created a custom init, we would have to pass this in. We would have to write all this code to pass the values in. But because we are making these variables that are not private, we can actually already use that initializer in our code. If these were constants, meaning they're unchanging, then we don't have an initializer because we cannot set these values different from what they're declared here. So I'm purposely making these not private variables so that we can use this auto-generated initializer throughout our code base. I'm going to do that basically across the entire app going forward. The last thing we're going to do is fix a little bit of a SwiftUI bug. I talked about this in the video on my YouTube channel as well. I'm just going to basically use this in the rest of our application. I'm not going to actually jump into the image loader view going forward. So for example, if I wanted to make this maybe a frame with a width of, let's say, 100 and a height of 200, you'll notice that the image did resize, but clearly this is not exactly what we put here because the height should be 200 and it should not be a square, but on the image it is a square. And that's because based on the resizing mode, the image is actually extending past the frame that it is allowed. So I want to clip it to the frame. So what I'm going to actually do instead is just put a rectangle on the screen here. So this is what the frame should actually look like. And then I'm going to make an overlay on the rectangle. And I will add the web image inside here. Let's uncomment that out. And then let's just clip it to that rectangle. So now it's clipped to that frame. Lastly, we don't need to actually draw that rectangle on the screen, right? Because it is just this black box that's going to appear. So let's make that opacity 0 and then put the overlay back on top. And now when we click on this, we want to click on this frame. We want to make sure that the image that is extending past the frame is not clickable. So I'm just going to allow hit testing as false. And there we have our image loader view. Last thing let's move this to make it reusable so that we can use this fake image URL across the application. Next to the components, I'm going to create another folder in our project called utilities. Inside the utilities, I will create an empty file and I will call this constants. Inside constants, let's just import the foundation framework and create a struct called constants and static let random image, the random image URL, and we will cut this, paste this as the random image URL. So now I can just call constants.randomImage from my code base. Random image. There we go. Let's jump into the welcome view. Where is it? Welcome view. And at the top of our screen, we're going to have an image loader view. And for now, let's just pass in an @state private var. We'll call this image name of type string. Set it equal to constants.randomImage. Just to remember that we do want to pass in an image here later. This will be the URL string. And I'm actually not going to make it private so that we can initialize it in our previews with a custom image if we want to. Let's take the padding and put the padding just on the CTA button at the bottom. And then let's make this ignore safe area so that it goes up to the edge of the device. All right, let's finish building out the rest of this screen. I will challenge you guys to try to build this on your own. This is probably one of the easier screens that we're going to build. We have basically a VStack and then another VStack with all of these items and then a parent VStack with the image and the bottom section here. I'll challenge you guys to go ahead and do this, but if you don't want to wait for the challenge, I'm going to go ahead and build it out. I'm going to move pretty quickly now because this is some pretty basic SwiftUI, to be honest. Let's close the navigator on the left side and let's get building. Let's create a VStack. Let's put some text that says AI chat. I'm going to Control Option Command to open up the emojis and paste in my favorite emoji. You guys can use whatever you want. Let's give this a font of large title as well as a font weight of, let's do semi-bold. Below that, we're gonna have another text that says YouTube at Swiftful Thinking. Obviously, this is just placeholder text for now. You can fix this in your own app. Font here will be caption, make it a little bit smaller, and we're going to do a foreground style of .secondary. One thing I'm going to do in this app, opposed to some of the other apps I've built on my channel, is I'm going to rely heavily on just the native fonts and the native colors. We have our accent color, but if I build an app just using the native fonts and the normal text color is .primary and the secondary is this little gray here, my entire app will basically be built and support dark mode out of the box, and that's going to save me a ton of time as a developer. So if I have the option where I don't have a UI developer that's like making me add specific colors to all of my items, I'm just going to default to using the native fonts and the native colors. Just a personal preference, but I can promise you it saves you a ton of time and effort if you have that option. All right, between the AI chat and this image, it looks like we have some spacing here. Let's make sure that's maybe it's 8. Below this, I'm going to put another VStack here, and let's put in, now we're going to work with the Get Started button and the Sign In button. So let's put a text, or actually we have the Sign In button already. Let's cut this, paste it here. I can get rid of this welcome because we don't need that anymore. The padding, I'm going to put outside the VStack down here. And below this, let's put in another text that says, already have an account, question mark, sign in. And maybe I'll use an exclamation mark. Let's give this an underline. We'll give this a font of body, which is the default font. And then I'm going to add an on tap gesture to this. I'm not going to make this a button because I don't want to have this UI where the button fades. So because we're using this on tap gesture, the tap gesture area is going to be only what renders on this text. So if I put like a background of color.red here, we can see that the tap gesture area is very small. So what I'm going to do is actually add some padding before this. Let's go padding of maybe 8 just to expand out the tappable area. And then to make it tappable, I do want to render a background, because if I don't render a background here, it is only going to be tappable on the actual text and not tappable in that whole area with the padding. So what I'm going to do is just add color.black with opacity of 001, just so that we can't actually see anything, but it will be tappable. I'm going to reuse that a bunch throughout this course. So let's copy this. Let's jump into our components, or sorry, our extensions folder. We have a view plus ext. I'm going to create another function called tappable background that returns some view, and let's just return the view with, remember this is self dot background color, but because there's only one modifier, it is implied, so we can just put it like this. So now let's call this from our code here, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. Dot tappable background. And lastly, let's add the terms of service and the privacy policies. Let's put it down here. I'm going to put an H stack with some spacing of 8. And then on the left, I'm going to use the native SwiftUI link, which just opens up Safari. We're going to look for the destination and label. The destination, let's add in a URL from a string. I don't actually have a URL just yet, so I'll leave that as a blank string. And on the label, let's click enter, and this will just be text that says terms of service. In the URL, let's add maybe https://www.apple.com for now. And then this URL is a optional URL. Let's force unwrap it, because I actually don't want to ever render this view if my privacy policy is not working. So normally I don't recommend force unwrapping, but this is one edge case where I feel comfortable doing it. On the right, we're going to add another one, so I'm going to copy and paste this. This one will say privacy policy. In between these, I'm just going to add a quick little circle in here. Let's give this a fill with our accent color. And let's give this a frame, make it real small, maybe 4 by 4 pixels. Just like that, we have our buttons here. I'm going to move this URL to our constants file. So let's copy this, go into constants. Let's go static let privacy policy URL and set it equal to this. And I'm going to copy and paste, and then we'll do our terms of service URL. Let's go back into our code, and now we're going to call constants.terms of service and constants.privacy policy. Let's wrap up this view with a little bit of polish. Let's see the spacing between the get started and the already have an account. Let's make that maybe spacing of 8 just to be specific. Maybe that's already what it was. I want to add a little bit of extra padding above this title here. So on the title section, let's add padding of .top, maybe 24. That looks closer to the design. And let's also put that spacing of 8 on this parent VStack up here. Cool. That looks pretty good to me. The UI looks pretty good. We're going to finish up the logic for actually clicking the create account or sign in button in a future video. For now, let's just clean up some of this code. I know this is not that much code and we don't really need to clean it up, but I like to keep the body as organized as possible. I already don't like that I can't see the full body just on one view on my computer. So what we're going to do is create some private variables inside this view just to hold these sections. I'm going to come down here. So firstly, we have this title section here. I'm going to copy this. Let's come down to the bottom, create a private var called title section of type SomeView, paste that in. The title section will go up here. I'm not going to put the padding so that I can actually customize this separate of the actual view. This section, let's also cut, and I'm going to call this CTA buttons. And then come down here, let's make a private var called CTA buttons of type SomeView. Paste that in. One more section here. Let's cut this, move it down to the bottom. I'm going to make a private var, and I'll call this policy links of type SomeView. Paste that in. I'll take my policy links and put them on the screen as well. Not that we had to do that, but now when I jump into this file, maybe 3 months from now, or another engineer comes in, it's going to be pretty easy to tell how this view is set up. It's a simple VStack with a couple sections. The title section is pretty obvious. The CTA section is pretty obvious, and the links. Cool. All right, that's all from this video. In the next video, we're going to start moving to other views in the onboarding flow. Let's finish up by Option Command C. Let's make this a feature, and we'll call this add WelcomeView UI, stage all, commit, and push up to GitHub. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.